The air in the briefing room crackled with tension, thick with the unspoken anticipation that hung over the team. Outside, the massive windows framed a vista of Earth, bathed in the pale light of the distant star. The reality of their mission hadn't fully set in yet, but the sharp metallic scent of ozone lingered in the sterile environment, stirring a sense of urgency. Commander Jarek Delvorn stood at the head of the table, his eyes narrowed, surveying the gathered faces. The team's equipment was laid out before them: hardened packs, custom-made survival gear, and weapons, their weight almost tangible in the room's cold atmosphere. "We don't get second chances on this one." Jarek's voice cut through the stillness, as solid as the ground beneath their feet. The laser plasma display flickered to life, casting bright blue lines across his face. He tapped the interface, and an image of the target world emerged. Class 1. A lush jungle teeming with hostile predators. "We've been invited to compete in the Galactic Survival Championship," he continued, his tone steady but laced with that undercurrent of calculated tension. "It's not a game. It's a proving ground. Every species in this galaxy will be watching, waiting to see how humanity measures up." Behind him, Alia Trallan, the Zorkarian strategist, shifted in her seat, her large, dark eyes flicking toward the screen. Her skin, a deep shade of teal, seemed to shimmer in the soft light as she spoke. "And what's the Council expecting? To watch us fail? Or are we just a sideshow for their amusement?" "Both," Jarek replied, his gaze never leaving the display. The flickering light from the laser plasma screen caught the edge of his jaw as he ground his teeth together, the weight of their mission pressing on him. "They want to test us, break us down, show the galaxy that humanity doesn't belong, and that's where we come in." Goran Thalik, the team's weapons expert, leaned forward, his rough hands tapping impatiently against the table. "Aren't we a little tired of being the underdog? Let's show them what we're made of." Jarek met his gaze, a cold smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's the plan. But I need you all to stay sharp. This isn't just about winning, it's about proving something bigger than ourselves." Iris Volmir, their tech expert and tactical advisor, shifted her weight, her fingers brushing over the heads-up display in front of her, illuminating the map of the alien terrain. Her short hair, streaked with silver, framed her face, and she looked up with a piercing focus. "You're telling me that we're supposed to survive in this kind of hellhole?" Her voice wasn't full of fear, but skepticism, her words sharp as they sliced through the tension. The display zoomed in on the planet's surface, revealing towering trees with thick, leathery leaves, their shadows swallowing everything beneath them. Jagged mountain ranges circled the landscape, crisscrossed by vicious rivers, their waters black and seething. Giant predators stalked the underbrush, their yellow eyes gleaming through the trees. "It's not just about surviving," Jarek repeated, his voice steely. "It's about turning the impossible into a second nature. We adapt and we thrive. We make Deathworlds feel like home." The team fell silent, absorbing the weight of the words. No one spoke for a moment, their eyes fixed on the violent beauty of the world on the display. The stark contrast of nature's brutality was a challenge that neither science nor weapons could wholly conquer. "Are we really going to treat this like a vacation spot, Jarek?" Alia's voice cut in again, her sharp tone laced with a touch of disbelief. "No offense, but this place looks like it could eat us alive." Jarek turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "You heard me right. This is our opportunity. If we don't take this seriously, if we don't rise to the occasion, it'll be more than just us fighting to survive. It'll be about the galaxy learning what humanity can do when pushed to its absolute limit." Goran's lips curled into a grin, his fingers brushing against the grip of his sidearm. "Sounds like my kind of challenge." "Just make sure you don't turn it into a barbecue too soon," Iris muttered, her fingers still dancing across the interface as she prepped their communication systems. The room's atmosphere shifted with her words, light but charged, tension giving way to quiet resolve. There was humor here, too. It was the kind of dry humor that would hold them together in the moments when everything seemed impossible, when the air would be thick with fear, and the ground beneath them would shake with the rhythm of alien beasts. "Iris is right," Jarek said, breaking the silence. "We're going to face things out there no one's ever survived. But we won't just survive. We'll redefine what it means to be alive. Humanity doesn't just cling to existence. We fight for a future, even in the face of death itself." His words carried the weight of conviction, and for a moment, the room seemed to settle into a kind of focused quiet. They weren't afraid. They were determined. Jarek turned back to the display, his fingers tapping against the interface again. "I'm putting together a plan. Everyone will have their role. This isn't just a battle for survival. This is a war for humanity's place in the stars." The screen shifted, pulling up blueprints of their survival gear. The team's suits were designed not just for protection, but for efficiency. Every strap, every piece of equipment was carefully tailored for the hostile environment they were about to enter. "You'll each have what you need, but remember, it's not just about the tech. It's about thinking outside the box. The world we're facing isn't static. It changes just like we do." Iris's fingers hovered over the display, pulling up a 3D model of the jungle environment. "Let's hope these gadgets do more than just keep us alive," she said dryly, zooming in on a set of high-tech sensors. "If we're lucky, they'll help us outsmart whatever is waiting for us." "I don't want luck," Jarek responded firmly. "I want us to be better, smarter, stronger. Let's take them by surprise. Show the galaxy that no matter what, humanity always has a way out." The sound of boots scraping against the cold floor echoed through the room as the team began to gear up. A low thrum of excitement stirred among them, tempered by the heavy understanding that this mission wasn't just about beating the odds. It was about rewriting them entirely. Their training, their instincts, and their unwavering resolve would define the fate of humanity on a stage much larger than any war they had fought before. Outside, the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the Earth's surface, and for a fleeting moment, the team stood in the presence of something bigger than themselves. "We leave in an hour," Jarek said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Get ready for the fight of our lives." The sound of their movements grew louder, their boots steady, their minds focused. This wasn't just a battle to win. It was a war to define them. And humanity had always thrived in the face of impossible odds. They had come to show the galaxy that even in the most inhospitable places, humans didn't just survive. They turned the impossible into something to celebrate. And now, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to face death head-on. The transport shuttle's hull groaned as it descended into the thick atmosphere of their first destination. A rumble shuddered through the crew, the deep vibration of the craft's thrusters biting through the sealed cabin. Jarek Delvorn's sharp eyes were fixed on the laser plasma display in front of him, his fingers tracing through the stream of data while his mind raced. This wasn't just any mission. It was the first step in making a statement that would echo through the galaxy. A challenge for survival, yes, but also for humanity's place among the stars. Beside him, Goran Thalik adjusted his gear, the tactile sounds of armor and weapons settling into place with a familiar rhythm. The man was a brute force of nature, yet there was a quiet calculation in his movements, the slight tilt of his head as he checked his weapon system. Iris Volmir, her face lit by the faint glow of the heads-up display in front of her, studied the terrain data. "We've got a Class 1 environment," she murmured, her voice laced with a touch of disbelief. "The atmosphere's thick, but not toxic. Temperatures pushing 32 degrees Celsius, a few large predators scattered across the landscape. If we play it right, we could settle in before they even notice us." Alya Trallan, sitting across from Jarek, was already mentally 3 steps ahead, her posture relaxed but her gaze laser-focused. The Zorkarian strategist's subtle energy always made her seem like an enigma, a person who could see more than what was immediately in front of her. "And yet the real danger won't be the creatures," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship's cooling systems. "It's the competition. They won't just be watching us. They'll be waiting for us to fail." The shuttle's belly hit the dense cloud cover, plunging through it with a sharp, sudden shift. Jarek's grip tightened on the armrest, his mind calculating, eyes scanning the outside world through the small, transparent windows. Below them, the jungle stretched in every direction, a canopy of thick, jagged green, broken only by the occasional flicker of movement. Something large, something deadly. He could feel it in his bones. "All right," Jarek said, his voice low and authoritative, a calm that set the tone for what was to come. "This isn't a vacation. These forests might look serene from up here, but they're anything but." He looked around at his team. "We make landfall in 10 minutes. Keep your wits about you. Get to work. We turn this into our advantage." Goran's lips curled into a grin, a feral look crossing his face. "Sounds like a damn good hunt to me." Jarek gave him a glance, his expression unreadable. "Stay focused. This is about survival. Everything else can wait." The shuttle hit the ground with a soft jolt, the air outside thick and humid, clinging to the skin like a second layer. The team quickly suited up in their modified armor, its smooth surfaces designed to deflect both environmental dangers and any alien life that might pose a threat. The air outside was sticky, heavy with the scent of wet earth and organic decay. The ground beneath their boots squelched as they disembarked, the rhythmic crunch of their steps mingling with the occasional rustle from the dense underbrush. The trees loomed tall, their massive roots twisting upward, forming gnarled shapes that reached out like fingers to grasp at the sky. Iris was the first to speak after a brief, tense silence. "The predators will be here soon," she muttered, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. "Let's get the shelters up. If we wait too long, they'll pick up our scent." Jarek didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the heads-up display as he pulled up a map of the area. "Set up base camp near that clearing ahead. We'll use the trees for cover and work with the natural flow of the land." Alia's keen eyes caught something in the distance, her sharp ears picking up a faint rustling noise. "Something's moving over there," she said, pointing to the far side of the clearing. The dense foliage parted, revealing the shadow of a massive creature, its form barely visible in the gloom. It moved like a predator, quiet but sure-footed, its golden eyes flashing with a hunger that sent a chill through the group. The creature wasn't interested in them, yet. "Goran, stay alert," Jarek ordered, his voice sharper now, the weight of responsibility settling on him. "We've got 10 minutes to get that shelter up. It'll give us the cover we need." The team spread out quickly, moving with the practiced ease of a group used to working together under pressure. Goran fell into position, his rifle ready, while Iris and Alia started setting up a temporary shelter. The fabric of their gear stretched taut in the humidity, the material almost seeming to vibrate with the heat. Jarek's mind raced, mentally mapping the layout of their temporary outpost, the tactical angles, the optimal positioning for defense. The air around them grew even heavier, the scent of rotting foliage mixing with the sharp tang of sweat. Jarek could almost taste the tension on the back of his tongue. The creature wasn't the only thing moving out there. His senses were heightened, alert to every change in the environment. A low growl rumbled somewhere off to his left, sending a ripple of instinct through his body. He knew it wasn't just the predators they had to worry about. They had enemies here beyond the deadly wildlife. "What's our status?" Jarek's voice was low but firm as he turned to Iris, his eyes never leaving the shifting tree line. "We're almost done," Iris replied, sweat beading on her brow as she struggled with the shelter's frame. "But we need more time. There's too much wildlife moving in. If we don't fortify soon, they'll smell us out." Jarek's hand twitched near his sidearm as the tension in the air became palpable. "We won't have time for a second attempt. Finish it now and be ready for anything." The shelter was barely erected when the ground began to rumble beneath their feet. The sound was distant at first, but it grew quickly, closer, louder. The growl from earlier was no longer a warning. It was a signal. The predators were coming. A massive shadow loomed crashing through the underbrush, its bulk shattering the surrounding trees with a deafening crack. "Get down!" Jarek shouted, diving to the side as the ground splintered under the creature's feet. The air tasted bitter now, the sudden adrenaline rush clogging his throat. Iris scrambled for her weapon, while Goran let out a sharp, exhilarated yell as he moved toward the massive creature. His excitement mirrored the danger. He was ready for this. But they all knew that this moment would define them. Jarek's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus on the plan. Don't engage unless we have no other choice." The creature's massive form loomed larger, its glowing eyes narrowing as it locked onto the group. It was no longer a question of whether they could survive. It was how long they could survive in the face of this relentless challenge. But Jarek wasn't concerned. He'd been in battles before. He'd been up against forces that seemed unstoppable. And he knew, without a doubt, that the biggest enemy here wasn't the creature. It was the uncertainty that hung over their heads like a storm cloud. "Ready yourselves," Jarek muttered under his breath. The silence in the jungle was thick, almost suffocating. Every movement was amplified. The rustle of the underbrush, the distant cry of unseen creatures, the soft whir of the equipment as it powered up. The team had barely settled into the camp they'd hastily built, their shelter offering little more than a fragile buffer against the harsh environment. Jarek stood motionless, his back to the shelter, eyes scanning the endless green expanse before him. The air was sticky, the kind of humidity that clung to your skin, making every breath feel heavier than the last. The damp earth beneath his boots had an unsettling familiarity, its moist grip a reminder that this world was not meant to be tamed. "Predators are moving closer," Goran muttered from the shadows, his voice low but clear. He was crouched near the edge of their shelter, his eyes tracking the movement of the massive creatures that had circled their camp the night before. His sharp instincts never failed to alert him to danger, and they all knew the forest wasn't going to wait patiently for them to settle in. Jarek gave a short nod, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The team had expected the wildlife to be their primary threat, but it wasn't the creatures that kept him up at night. It was something else, something unseen, a feeling in the pit of his stomach that told him they weren't alone, not in the way they thought. The last few hours had been too calm, too still, despite the ferocity of the planet around them. This jungle, this so-called Class 1 Deathworld, wasn't just an obstacle. It was a test. "We need to move faster," Jarek said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need to set up better defenses. If we wait here much longer, we'll be sitting ducks." Alya Trallin, ever the strategist, studied the terrain with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The Zorkarian's mind was already working, shifting the pieces on an invisible board. "The environment's too hostile," she said, her tone laced with an edge of doubt. "We could dig in, but every time we stop, it feels like we're inviting danger." Jarek's gaze narrowed, and his fingers brushed over the heads-up display, calling up the maps they had of the surrounding jungle. His mind churned as the laser plasma display flickered and hummed to life. The terrain was dense, every layer of plant life concealing a hidden threat. The predators were bad enough, but there was something far more dangerous waiting for them, something they hadn't fully accounted for. The real enemy wasn't the wildlife, it was the intelligence they hadn't seen coming. "Maybe it's time we stop running from it," Jarek said quietly, his voice barely a whisper as he turned to face his team. "We'll turn the tables." "How do you mean?" Goran's rough voice was tinged with skepticism, but curiosity sparkled in his eyes. He trusted Jarek, but this new plan was risky, riskier than anything they'd attempted yet. Jarek's gaze hardened, and a slow smile crept across his face. "We start thinking like they do. We stop reacting to everything in front of us and use it against them. We play the predator, not the prey." Iris Volmir, always the engineer and tactical mind, looked up from the devices she was tinkering with, her brow furrowing in thought. "You're saying we turn the jungle into a weapon? Trap the predators into doing our work for us?" "Exactly," Jarek said, his voice steady, unshaken by the intensity of the plan. "We adapt the environment, manipulate it. We make the terrain fight on our side." There was a pause as the team digested the weight of his words. The idea was bold, crazy even, but it was the kind of thinking that had gotten them this far. Iris was already pulling up schematics for the traps, her fingers tapping rapidly on the display. Goran stood, adjusting his rifle, clearly eager for the action. "How do we know it'll work?" Alya asked, her voice sharp with the pragmatic doubt that had kept her alive through countless battles. "What's the backup plan?" "There's no backup plan," Jarek replied, his eyes scanning the shifting shadows of the jungle. "This is the plan." The air was thick with the weight of those words. It wasn't just the strategy, it was the uncertainty that lurked in every corner of the unknown, the risk of plunging deeper into the jungle without the promise of success. But if they didn't take that risk, they'd be swallowed whole by it. The team began to move quickly, setting up the traps, strategically placing devices that would distort the jungle's natural state. They hacked at trees to redirect the flow of water, used their technology to create environmental disruptions, and set up makeshift barriers designed to confuse and disorient the predators. As the final trap clicked into place, Iris turned to Jarek, her face drawn but resolute. "Let's see if it works," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Stay sharp," Jarek replied, his voice low. "We've started something they won't forget." The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Hours passed, the team waiting in tense silence. The air hung thick with the buzzing of unseen insects, the occasional snap of distant branches as larger creatures prowled the perimeter. The tension was unbearable, each passing minute stretching longer than the last. Then, it happened. The ground beneath them shook violently, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. It was the predator they had been waiting for, the massive creature from the shadows. It surged forward, its huge form charging directly into their carefully laid traps. For a moment, it seemed as though everything would fall apart. The creature collided with the first barrier, but it didn't stop. It roared, furious, pushing through the obstacles, but it couldn't fully overcome the chaos Jarek had triggered. "Now!" Jarek shouted, his voice cutting through the adrenaline-fueled haze. The team sprang into action, weapons drawn. The creature was disoriented, its movements erratic as it struggled against the traps designed to confuse it. Goran fired first, his shots precise, aimed at the creature's vulnerable spots. Iris moved to disable the last remaining safety measures of their traps, using the jungle itself to her advantage. Alia, quiet and deadly, circled the beast, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The battle was brutal, raw, a fight against an apex predator in its own domain. The team worked in tandem, each movement calculated, each strike designed to weaken the creature without fully destroying it. Finally, after what seemed like hours, it fell, its massive form crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. The jungle fell silent. Jarek stood over the creature, his chest heaving with exertion, his eyes cold but satisfied. "We've made our mark." But even as the team celebrated their victory, a shiver ran down Jarek's spine. The creature wasn't the real enemy. It was just the beginning. Something was out there, something far worse than they had anticipated, and it was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The mystery of the jungle was far from over. In fact, they had just begun to scratch the surface. As the team moved to secure their camp and prepare for the next phase, Jarek couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. What they had seen in the shadows, what they had yet to face, would push them all to the breaking point. And they didn't even know the full scale of the danger they were in. The real challenge had only just begun. The jungle's pulse never ceased, a living, breathing entity that seemed to shift with every passing moment. It whispered its secrets on the wind, its dark corners filled with things that skittered just out of sight, the shadows thick with danger. Despite the victory over the predator, Jarek Delvorn couldn't shake the nagging sense that something more insidious was lurking just beyond the veil of the world around them. The creature they had downed wasn't the ultimate threat. It was a mere prelude, a test, a warning. The real challenge had yet to reveal itself. "We're not alone here," Jarek muttered under his breath as he paced the perimeter of their makeshift camp. His boots sank slightly into the wet, sticky earth with each step, the smell of damp leaves and decaying wood filling the air, thick and overpowering. The light filtered through the canopy in pale shafts, dappling the ground with golden flecks, but it did little to dispel the feeling of constant unease that clung to his skin like sweat. Behind him, Goran Thalik and Iris Volmir were adjusting their gear, checking their weapons and the traps they had set earlier. Goran's large frame moved with purpose, every step deliberate, his mind clearly still on the hunt. Iris, her usually sharp features now drawn with exhaustion, inspected the laser plasma displays that illuminated the surroundings, pulling up scans and data feeds. The creature was the first wave, Alia Tralan said, her voice low as she moved to stand beside Jarek, her eyes scanning the dense thicket. It's too quiet now. The jungle's shifting. Something's watching us. Her words carried a weight that hung in the air like the humidity, thick and unsettling. The Zorkarian strategist's sharp gaze never wavered, even as she adjusted the strap of her weapon. Her race's keen senses were an asset, always attuned to the slightest movement, the smallest change in the environment. Then we'll have to be smarter, Jarek said, his voice steady despite the tightening knot in his gut. This jungle doesn't work on our terms. We need to turn it against itself. The team had learned quickly that survival wasn't just about brute force. The jungle itself had its own rhythms, its own predators, both the tangible and the unseen. As they dug in deeper, Jarek's mind whirred with possibilities. They were playing a dangerous game, but they had to keep moving forward. The moment they stopped, even for a breath, they were vulnerable. He turned to Iris. Give me the breakdown. What are we dealing with? Iris's eyes flicked over to the heads-up display in front of her, fingers tapping deftly against the interface, her brow furrowing in concentration. Well, the good news is that the surrounding terrain is mapped. The bad news is that we're seeing increased seismic activity. Something stirring beneath us. Could be another predator, or something larger, something we haven't encountered yet. What about the sky? Jarek asked, his mind already running through their options. Clear for now, but the atmospheric pressure is shifting. If we get a storm, we'll have to move fast. Iris looked up, her eyes meeting his, determination etched in every line of her face. We'll have to make the next move carefully, Jarek. Before he could respond, a rustling came from the shadows of the jungle. Jarek's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. The noise wasn't distant. It was close. Too close, like the creeping uncertainty in his gut. Stay alert, he commanded, his voice low but firm. Goran, on the perimeter. Iris, monitor the displays. Alia, with me, we'll investigate. They moved quickly, their bodies blending into the thick foliage, the jungle's sounds swallowing them as they ventured into the unknown. Every step seemed to echo, the sound of their boots muffled by the rich earth and dense vegetation. Jarek's senses were sharp, his mind racing through possible scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. There was something more here, something more than just predators. The rustling intensified. It wasn't just one creature this time. Jarek motioned for the team to hold back. The air grew warmer as the humidity thickened, the moisture clinging to his skin like a second layer. The smell of rich earth and the faint tang of metal filled his nostrils, a grounding sensation that steadied his nerves. Then, emerging from the underbrush, came figures Jarek never expected, alien figures, humanoid, but not like anything they had seen before. The first one stepped into the clearing, tall and lithe, its skin shimmering with an iridescent glow. Its eyes were black, absorbing the surrounding light, an unsettling void. Its movement was fluid, almost graceful, its head tilted in curiosity as it studied the humans standing before it. Alia stiffened beside Jarek. They're not hostile, she said quietly, but there was a tension in her voice. But we can't take chances. The alien made no move to advance, but its presence was commanding. Its skin flickered in the fading light, the movement hypnotic, like a living mirror. Behind it, more figures emerged from the shadows, others of its kind, silent, watching. Jarek's pulse quickened, his instincts screaming at him to react, but his mind stayed calm. This wasn't an ambush, at least not in the traditional sense. The creatures didn't seem aggressive, they were curious, like predators sizing up their prey. But there was something else in their gaze. Intelligence. We don't need to fight them, Jarek muttered, more to himself than anyone else. We need to outthink them. The alien in front of him raised its hand, a gesture that seemed to mean something, but Jarek had no way of knowing what. The creature's eyes fixed on his, unblinking. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, like the sound of an unseen current. It wasn't a sound, not in the traditional sense, but a pressure that seemed to vibrate in the air, pushing against his chest. Alia's voice broke through the tension. It's trying to communicate, she said. It's not just observing us. Jarek nodded, his eyes still locked on the alien. Let's see where this goes. The creature's movements were fluid, graceful, like it was never really touching the ground, hovering just above it. It moved forward cautiously, but there was no sign of aggression. Jarek didn't flinch. If this was an attempt at communication, then it was his responsibility to handle it. I think it's asking us to follow, Alia said softly, her eyes narrowing. It could be a trap. No, Jarek said firmly, his voice a low growl. It's not. We don't know what they want yet, but we'll find out. The alien turned and began walking, its movements deliberate and confident, as though it had expected them to follow. The rest of the team hesitated for only a moment before falling in behind Jarek. Their steps were quiet, the sounds of the jungle muffling the noise of their passage. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the alien led them through an untouched path, the vegetation parting as though the jungle itself was making way for them. A strange feeling settled over Jarek, the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than they could comprehend. The alien stopped before a massive stone structure, its surface covered in symbols Jarek didn't recognize. It was ancient, yet the material felt almost alive, pulsing with an energy that hummed in the air. The team gathered around, their weapons at the ready, but their minds focused on the mystery unfolding before them. This is just the beginning, Jarek muttered under his breath. We've stepped into something far deeper than we expected. And as the alien turned to face them, its black eyes reflecting the light of the plasma displays, Jarek knew that this was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding an ancient force that had been hidden away on this death world, waiting for someone to awaken it. And they had just done so. The air was electric as the team approached the ancient structure, the alien leader guiding them with an unsettling calm. It had led them through thick, treacherous undergrowth, over uneven ground that seemed to pulse with some unseen energy. And now they stood before a monument that defied all logic. The stone surface of the structure shimmered under the light, like a living organism, the carvings shifting and morphing in response to their presence. The temperature around them had dropped sharply, the air biting at their skin, as though the jungle itself was reacting to the intruders. Jarek's breath came out in visible puffs, the cold wrapping around him like a shroud. The sense of anticipation weighed heavily on the team, the oppressive silence around them broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves, the faint scent of moss and wet stone filling their nostrils. The jungle's ever-present hum faded, replaced by something darker, a deep rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate from the stones themselves. "Stay focused," Jarek muttered, his voice low but firm, as he watched the alien turn back to them. The creature's black eyes gleamed with what could only be described as knowing. It gestured toward the structure, a silent invitation. Goran shifted uncomfortably, the pressure in the air making him edgy. "This feels like a trap," he said, his voice tight with suspicion, though his hand remained steady on his weapon. "Whatever's inside that thing, it's not going to be friendly." "It's not a trap," Alia replied softly, her gaze fixed on the alien. "At least, not in the way we think. It wants us to enter. It's offering something. The question is, what?" Jarek didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the strange, pulsing structure. His gut told him the answer lay within, but there was something else, something darker that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. "We don't have a choice. We've come this far." With that, they stepped forward, the thick air pressing against them as they crossed the threshold into the heart of the monument. The inside was a stark contrast to the world outside. It was cooler, the oppressive humidity giving way to a dry, almost sterile atmosphere. The walls of the chamber were lined with symbols, glyphs and images that twisted and turned in impossible ways. The laser plasma displays flickered faintly, showing flashes of images that seemed to flow and evolve as if alive. Goran glanced around, his hand still on the rifle, but he was more focused on the strange, mechanical hum that resonated through the floor, rising in intensity. "This place feels like it's alive," he muttered, his voice low. Iris, her fingers working on the equipment at her side, nodded. "It's definitely not just a building. Whatever this is, it's an artifact, a sentient one maybe." They moved further into the chamber, and the alien stopped at the far end. It turned to face them, its eyes locking with Jarek's, an intensity that spoke more than words could. Slowly, it extended one long, slender arm toward the center of the room, where a massive crystalline structure stood, humming softly. The structure pulsed with light, and as it did, the air seemed to grow heavier, the temperature dropping even further. Jarek's breath caught in his throat, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. "What is this?" Alia asked, her voice sharp, but with a hint of wonder that Jarek felt too. "I believe this is what we've been searching for," Jarek replied. "The real test." The alien leader made no move to speak. It simply stood there, waiting. Its stillness only heightened the tension in the room. The laser plasma display shifted once more, showing the glyphs surrounding the crystal, now glowing faintly with eerie, swirling patterns. Each new symbol seemed to draw something out of the air, like it was pulling energy from the very atmosphere around them. "We have to interact with it," Iris said, her voice steady, her hand now resting on a nearby panel, her fingers tracing the air above it. "If we don't, it could lock us out completely." The sound of her voice echoed, blending with the unnatural hum. Jarek's gaze flicked between the crystal and the alien, who remained still and silent, but with an unmistakable air of anticipation. "This isn't a test of strength," Jarek said quietly. "It's a test of understanding." The tension in the air was palpable as Jarek slowly approached the crystal. It pulsed again, this time with a flash of blinding light, and the whole chamber seemed to shift, the walls bending inward as if to contain them. A low growl vibrated through the stone beneath their feet, and Jarek felt the ground tremble. His instinct screamed at him to stop, but he didn't. With a deep breath, he placed his hand against the crystal. The moment he did, a shock of energy rushed through him, like lightning coursing through his veins. His body stiffened, and for a split second, the world around him seemed to stretch and warp. The team froze, watching him intently. The alien did not move, its dark eyes watching with an almost predatory calm. "What the hell is happening?" Goran growled, but Jarek couldn't answer. His body had gone rigid, as if caught in a web of some invisible force. The air around him thickened, and the symbols on the walls began to shift, converging in a single pattern. It was a map, a layout, one Jarek had seen before, except this one was different. It wasn't a map of terrain, but of paths. Paths that wove through time, through realities, a glimpse of something much larger than any challenge they had faced so far. He gasped, his hand falling away from the crystal as the shock of energy subsided. The crystal dimmed, but a soft, ghostly image remained in the air, an open, shifting space filled with fleeting moments, each more surreal than the last. Jarek stood there, his mind racing. "It's showing us, showing me what's ahead. The path, it's not just a physical one. It's temporal. We're being guided. But toward what?" Iris took a tentative step forward, her fingers twitching as she scanned the room. "This is beyond what we expected. This is no longer about survival. This is something different. We need to be ready," Jarek said, his voice trembling with the realization of what they were up against. "This isn't just about conquering a death world. It's about understanding forces far beyond our comprehension." The alien's eyes gleamed, and it stepped forward, its motion fluid, almost like it was waiting for Jarek to speak. It wasn't hostile. It was patient. It understood. Jarek turned to his team, the weight of the knowledge settling on him. "Whatever's coming next, we face it together. We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting for something we can't yet see." The alien's silent watchfulness seemed to amplify the tension in the room, but it wasn't just a test of strength. It was a test of what they could truly understand and how far they were willing to go to redefine the very concept of survival. In the silence that followed, the crystal dimmed, and the air returned to its heavy, oppressive stillness. Jarek's heart pounded in his chest, his mind still racing with questions, and in that silence, a new understanding settled between them all. The true challenge had only just begun. The jungle's silence pressed in, a heavy blanket suffocating the sounds of the outside world. The air had thickened with an eerie stillness, the pulse of energy from the crystal now fading into a low, persistent vibration that seemed to echo deep within Yarek's chest. The alien stood silently, its gaze unyielding. No words passed between them, but the unspoken understanding between Yarek and the creature was clear. This was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a test of their very perceptions of reality. Yarek stood, rooted to the spot, the weight of the crystal's revelation still settling over him. The paths it had shown him, twisting threads of time and space, were still fresh in his mind. They were on the edge of something vast, something dangerous, and they had only scratched the surface. A low growl shattered the stillness, followed by the unmistakable crunch of twigs snapping underfoot. Yarek's senses flared as he turned to face the darkening jungle, the sharp scent of damp earth filling his lungs, the tang of sweat mixing with the cold bite of fear in the air. It wasn't just the predators they had to worry about. The jungle itself was shifting, responding to something deeper, darker. The ground trembled, almost imperceptibly, like a warning. "We're not alone," Goran muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his rifle, his eyes scanning the trees. His muscles coiled like a spring, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. Iris was at Yarek's side in an instant, her fingers flying over the heads-up display in front of her. "Something's coming," she said, her voice calm but edged with tension. "I'm getting multiple energy signatures. They're close, moving fast." Yarek didn't need to hear more. His eyes flicked to the alien whose black eyes glinted in the fading light, unblinking, unreadable. "This is it," Yarek said quietly, his voice low but steady. "We need to move." Alia, ever vigilant, stepped closer, her gaze scanning the darkening jungle. "We don't have much time before they close in on us. The terrain's changing. That crystal, it's waking something up." Yarek nodded. The air had changed, thick with the pressure of something about to snap. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, this time more violently, sending a wave of unease rippling through the group. The first creature appeared from the shadows, its massive form moving swiftly, its body low to the ground, nearly invisible in the thick foliage. Its muscles rippled beneath the sleek, alien skin, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It didn't hesitate as it lunged forward, its jaws snapping with an unearthly screech. "Take cover!" Yarek shouted, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. Goran was the first to react, moving with practiced ease, his rifle raised as he fired at the beast. The sharp crack of the weapon rang out, sending a shudder through the trees. The creature recoiled, but it wasn't alone. More emerged, their forms blending with the jungle's shadows, their eyes glowing like fireflies in the night. The jungle was alive with movement now, the rustling of branches and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. Yarek didn't waste time. He moved into the thick underbrush, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth as he drew his weapon. Behind him, Goran fired again, his shots finding their marks as the creatures faltered, but they were relentless, an unstoppable tide of fury crashing toward them. "We need to drive them back," Yarek shouted. "Make it quick." Alia moved to his side, her eyes flashing with determination. "I'll set up the perimeter," she said, already pulling out a small device from her pack. She knelt swiftly, planting it into the ground with deft precision. A sharp, metallic click followed, and within seconds, a barrier of energy surged to life around them, crackling with force. The creatures hesitated, their glowing eyes narrowing, sensing the shift. But Yarek wasn't giving them any more time. He signaled to Goran and Iris, who were positioned on opposite sides, and the three of them converged on the beasts, weaving through the dense foliage with calculated efficiency. The air grew heavier with every step, the pressure increasing as the creatures came closer. Yarek could feel his pulse quicken, the thrum of energy rising within him as he focused. The jungle was no longer a place of safety. It was an arena, a battleground. They were the prey, but in this moment, they were also the hunters. With a sharp twist, Yarek dove to the ground, avoiding the massive claws of one creature as it slashed through the air where he had just stood. He rolled to the side, coming up with his weapon aimed directly at its head. His shot rang out, echoing through the jungle, and the creature staggered back, its body crumpling to the ground. Iris was on the move, using the energy from her plasma devices to create controlled explosions in the surrounding trees, sending a shower of branches and leaves crashing down around the remaining beasts. The sudden chaos disoriented them, causing the creatures to hesitate, just long enough for Goran to close in and deliver the final blow. But it wasn't over. Jarek could feel it in his bones. The energy in the air was shifting again, this time darker, more volatile. The jungle wasn't done with them yet. "They're not the only danger," Alia warned, her voice tight as she kept her weapon raised, scanning the jungle for any signs of movement. "The ground's unstable. This place, this jungle, it's shifting. The real test is coming." And then, without warning, the ground beneath them erupted. A massive tremor shook the jungle, sending trees toppling like matchsticks. The energy barrier flickered, straining under the pressure. Jarek barely had time to react before the ground cracked open, a fissure splitting the earth. The creatures, disoriented and frightened, scattered in all directions, but the ground was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Jarek barely had time to yell for the team to move before the jungle seemed to collapse in on itself. The trees groaned, their massive trunks splintering as the earth shifted violently beneath them. It felt as though the entire world was coming undone. "We need to get out of here," Iris shouted, her voice drowned out by the roaring tremors. Jarek didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, pulling his team toward a narrow opening in the jungle. The earth was splitting, the air thick with dust and debris, but they had no choice. The creatures were the least of their worries now. The jungle had become a weapon, a living, breathing entity that had turned against them. As they ran, Jarek couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been awakened by the crystal, whatever force was stirring in the depths of the jungle, was far from finished. It was as if the world itself had been turned into an arena for a fight they couldn't fully comprehend. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Jarek said, his voice barely audible over the chaos around them. "We're fighting for control of everything, time, reality, and the very world beneath our feet." Ahead of them, the jungle seemed to open up, revealing a clearing. But the moment they stepped into it, Jarek knew it was too quiet. Something was waiting, and they hadn't seen it yet. The jungle felt different now. It was as if the very ground beneath their boots had become a living thing, reacting to their every move. Jarek could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the palpable tension that hung in the air, as if the planet itself were waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to trigger its next move. The creatures had all but vanished after the tremors, leaving behind a silence that felt too thick, too oppressive. The team moved cautiously through the clearing, their senses stretched thin. The energy from the crystal still buzzed in their bodies, a constant reminder that they were operating in a place that defied the laws they knew. Jarek's mind raced as he tried to put the pieces together. This was no ordinary world, no ordinary challenge. The jungle was alive, changing in ways they couldn't predict. "Something's coming," Iris muttered, her voice low as she studied the shifting landscape through her heads-up display. Her fingers danced across the interface, pulling up data that flickered and shifted, the information flowing faster than she could process it. Jarek's gaze swept over the clearing. The trees were bent and twisted, their branches reaching out like claws, as though trying to hold them in place. The air was still, but there was a subtle shift in the humidity, the kind that made your skin feel tight, your lungs heavy. His fingers brushed the edge of his weapon, but his mind wasn't on the creatures anymore. The real challenge was about to begin. "We can't wait for it to come to us," he said, his voice low but steady. "We need to take the fight to it." Goran looked up from his position near the edge of the clearing, his brow furrowed. "And how exactly do you propose we do that? We're on its turf now. It's been playing us this whole time." "I know," Jarek replied, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. "That's why we need to adapt. The jungle isn't just a force of nature, it's part of the problem. We've been reactive, but it's time to change the rules." He turned to Alia, who had been silently watching the surroundings, her gaze sharp and calculating. "We know how the creatures behave now, and we know this place better than it knows us. We're going to manipulate it, use its own defenses against it." Alia tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "So, We lure it into a trap. But how do we get the upper hand? This isn't a simple ambush. We need to outsmart it. We'll make it think we're the prey, Jarek said, his mind already putting together the plan. We'll create false signs of weakness, draw it out, and force it into an open space. Then we strike. Goran grunted, his hand tightening around his weapon. You want us to play dead? Hope it doesn't kill us in the process? We'll give it what it wants. Easy targets. But we're not just laying down for it. We'll be ready to turn the tables the moment it moves into position. Jarek's voice was a steady rhythm now, each word calculated. Iris, I need you to tap into the jungle's energy. Use the environment. Turn it against them. Iris nodded, already pulling up the data on her display. It'll take a moment to adjust the traps, but I can redirect the flow of energy. We can overload the predator's senses, disorient it long enough for us to strike. Jarek's eyes flicked back to the alien that had guided them here. It stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, observing them in silence, its dark eyes unblinking. It had offered them the path forward, but now it was waiting for them to make the first move. There was no time to waste. The jungle's energy was shifting again, building up around them. The creatures were returning, but this time, they would be the ones in control. We don't have much time, Jarek said, his tone sharpening as the team began to move into position. Get ready. The first steps of the plan were simple but vital. Goran and Alya positioned themselves along the tree line, creating false signs of weakness, disturbing the brush, leaving traces of movement, making it seem like they had been scattered or overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Jarek and Iris worked to set the final stage. Jarek activated the perimeter traps, using the environment to his advantage, manipulating the energy that pulsed through the jungle. The air hummed as the energy began to shift, channels opening in the ground and branches that had once been solid, now pulsing with power. This is it, Iris said, her voice tense but controlled. The jungle's almost ready to react. We're in sync now. They won't know what hit them. Jarek nodded, his focus narrowing as he turned back to the clearing. The weight of the moment settled over him, his pulse steady as he visualized the steps that lay ahead. They had made the jungle their ally, turning its chaotic energy into a weapon they could wield. But the real test was about to begin. The creatures were closing in. Jarek's voice was a low growl as he spoke into the silence. It's coming. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The trees shook, their massive branches creaking as the jungle seemed to come alive. Jarek's grip tightened on his weapon as the first beast emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It moved with a speed and precision that betrayed its predatory instincts, but it didn't seem to notice the traps. The team had done their work well, and now it was time to execute. Now, Jarek said sharply. The team sprang into action, their movements fluid and synchronized. Goran fired first, his shots echoing through the clearing as the creature faltered, disoriented by the sudden burst of energy from the jungle's traps. Alya darted forward, using the chaos to her advantage, while Iris unleashed a burst of plasma from her device, sending a shockwave that pushed the creature back. For a moment, the jungle seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. The creature reeled, its glowing eyes flashing as it tried to recalibrate. But the team was ready. They had planned this moment, and now they were going to take advantage of it. Jarek moved forward, his body a blur of motion, and with a precise strike, he disabled the creature's defensive systems. It staggered back, its massive form crumpling to the ground as the energy in the jungle surged once more, driving the beast into retreat. But it wasn't over. The jungle wasn't done with them yet. As the creature fell, the ground beneath their feet began to rumble once more. This was only the beginning of the war they were waging, not just for survival, but for control of the very world they had entered. Jarek's eyes flicked to the horizon, a grim resolve settling over him. This isn't just about winning anymore. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity doesn't just survive, it conquers, and we're only getting started. As the team prepared for the next wave, Jarek knew this was only the first of many battles. They had broken the jungle's rules, turned its traps into their weapons, and survived the onslaught. But now they would face the ultimate test, the real reason they had come to this planet. The challenges were only beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. The ground rumbled again, this time with an intensity that rattled the very air around them. Jarek's team stood in the clearing, sweat dripping down their faces as they adjusted their stances, eyes darting toward the jungle's edge. The pulse of energy from the crystal had intensified, pushing outwards like an invisible wave that wrapped around their bodies, tingling beneath their skin. Jarek could feel it, a hum deep within his bones, an undeniable truth that they were about to face something greater than themselves. "This is it," Goran muttered, his voice low but heavy with understanding. The air around them felt electric, charged with the same force that had been building ever since they set foot on this world. The jungle's strange power was more than just a backdrop now. It was a force that controlled everything here, a pulse that ran beneath the surface of every action, every movement. "This isn't just a test of survival anymore," Jarek replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon where shadows twisted and writhed. "It's a test of humanity. Not how we survive, but how we rise above." Alia moved silently beside him, her eyes scanning the shifting shadows of the trees. "We've made it this far, but the jungle still hasn't shown us everything. We don't know what it's hiding, or what's waiting for us." The pulse of energy from the crystal continued to intensify, the earth shaking beneath them with each passing second. It felt like the world was closing in around them, the jungle now more than just an enemy. It was an entity, alive and watching, a force they couldn't fully comprehend. The dense foliage seemed to breathe, the air growing heavier with each breath, thick with the weight of uncertainty. Jarek's grip tightened around his weapon, the familiar weight of it grounding him. "Whatever's coming, we face it together. Humanity isn't here to bend, to submit. We're here to show them who we are." His voice rang out with a ferocity that sent a shiver down his spine. There was no fear in him now. He had seen too much, fought too hard, and lost too much to be afraid of what was ahead. He turned to his team, his eyes blazing with determination. "This is what we came for, to show the galaxy that humanity doesn't just survive, we thrive. And when they thought we couldn't go any further, when they thought we were done, that's when we prove them wrong." The jungle trembled again, this time with a finality that felt like the last breath of a dying creature. The darkness of the trees parted, and through the gloom emerged figures, more creatures, more predators, but these were different. They weren't the feral beasts they had encountered before. These were intelligent. They moved in a coordinated formation, their eyes glinting with the same unnatural glow. Their posture was poised, measured. The alien creatures encircled the clearing, their movements deliberate, their eyes fixed on the humans standing at its center. The jungle had grown quiet now, the rustling of the leaves and the distant calls of other creatures silenced, as if the very environment itself was holding its breath. "This is it," Iris said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she worked furiously at the heads-up display, tapping into the jungle's network of energy. "They're here to finish what they started." Goran stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching against the dry earth, his rifle ready but his stance controlled, calculated. "Then we finish it first," he said, his voice gruff but full of conviction. Jarek took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. They weren't just standing against predators anymore. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were facing everything the galaxy had ever believed about humanity. The idea that humans were weak, fragile, incapable of understanding or surviving in a hostile universe, it was about to be shattered. "Ready yourselves," Jarek said, his voice steady, unwavering. "This ends now." The ground trembled once more, but this time it wasn't the jungle. It was the final force, the one that had been watching, waiting. A roar, deep and guttural, shook the trees as a massive figure emerged from the center of the clearing. The alien leader, the one that had guided them this far. It was no longer just a figure. It was something else, something older, something more powerful. Its presence rippled through the air, a palpable force that made the jungle seem like it was shrinking away from it. It was taller than the others, its body adorned with symbols and markings that shimmered with the same energy they had encountered in the crystal. Its eyes, once dark and unreadable, now burned with an intensity that made the team's hearts race. It spoke without words, only the same deep hum they had heard before, a low resonance that thrummed through the air, reverberating in their chest, in their bones. Jarek's breath caught as he felt the weight of its gaze. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, thought them weak and insignificant. But now, in the face of this power, it wasn't about defeating the creature in front of them. It was about making sure the galaxy knew who they were. Jarek stepped forward, the heat of the alien's presence pushing against him. But he didn't flinch. You think we're fragile. You think we can't handle your games. But you don't understand. You never have. The creature's eyes flickered with something akin to recognition, as if it understood the meaning behind Jarek's words. The air grew still, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. It was as if the world was waiting for something, waiting for humanity to rise. You think we're weak? Jarek's voice rang out louder now, each word echoing in the stillness. We're not. We never were. Iris, her voice barely a whisper, echoed his sentiment. We don't need to be the strongest. We don't need to be the biggest. We just need to live. We adapt. We fight. And when the universe thinks it can break us, we come back stronger. The alien's gaze remained fixed on them, but now there was a shift. A subtle tremor rippled through the air, as if the jungle was acknowledging the truth of their words. Jarek took another step forward, his eyes never leaving the creatures. Humanity doesn't just survive, he said, his voice fierce, unwavering. We thrive, and that's why you'll never break us. In that moment, something shifted in the air, a wave of energy, a crackling tension that split the clearing in two. The alien leader bowed its head, not in submission, but in something else. Recognition, understanding. And just like that, the battle was over. The jungle fell silent. The creatures, the predators, the ancient force that had tested them. It was all still. As if, in that moment, the universe had realized that humanity had come to stay. Jarek turned to his team, his eyes meeting each of theirs. The weight of the moment settled over them. They weren't just survivors. They were humanity. And as the crystal's energy faded into the earth, leaving behind nothing but the sound of the wind and the beating of their hearts, Jarek knew that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They had proven it. Humanity was not just a force to be reckoned with. Humanity was the force. And they weren't going anywhere. Humanity has ignored our regulations for the last time, the council leader's voice boomed across the galactic chamber. It carried a sense of inevitability, a foreboding pitch that sent ripples of tension through the crowded expanse. Alien eyes of all shapes and sizes locked onto the lone figure standing at the center of the room. The massive crystal chamber, suspended in the void of space, hummed with a charged silence. At the heart of this stillness, James Walker, Earth's ambassador, stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored suit, unfazed by the gravity of the moment. The weight of 1,000 alien gazes settled on him, but he didn't flinch. His glasses, round and thin, gleamed faintly under the room's lights, the only sign of life in his otherwise impassive demeanor. He wiped them carefully with the corner of his jacket, then adjusted them over his nose. The motion was so casual it bordered on dismissive, an unconscious deflection of the gravity in the air. We've had enough of your colonies expanding without permits, your ships entering restricted spaces, the leader continued, his blue skin shifting into a deeper shade, his 4 eyes narrowing in anger. His words reverberated, taking on the cadence of a ritualistic declaration. The other members of the council, seated in their elevated multi-tiered pods, looked down on Walker with a mixture of disdain and anticipation. Are we done here? Walker asked, his voice cutting through the rising tension with unhurried calm. He glanced down at his wristwatch, then back at the leader. I have a dinner reservation back on Earth. His voice was smooth, almost indifferent, yet unmistakably sharp. A ripple of disbelief shot through the council. Some exchanged glances. Others simply froze, as though the mere mention of food disrupted the very fabric of the session. The council leader's 4 arms shot up in a dramatic arc. You dare mock these proceedings? Humanity's disregard for galactic order ends today. The exclamation echoed through the chamber, amplified by the chamber's acoustics to a near-deafening level. Walker, still unperturbed, pulled out his phone from his pocket. "I'm just updating my reservation. Traffic might be a bit heavier with all your ships moving around," he remarked, not even glancing at the alien dignitaries. He typed a few more words into the device, his fingers moving effortlessly across the screen, the soft tapping a strange juxtaposition to the growing tension around him.